And I'm asking, is it time for the UK to build an Iron Dome? Well, the leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, thinks so, and she feels so strongly about it that she broke ranks to urge the Prime Minister to consider it. And last weekend, Iran fired over 300 drones and ballistic missiles into Israel, and all but a few were intercepted by the country's Iron Dome defence system. Ms Mordaunt said, to those that say about our defence ambitions, we can't do, shouldn't do or can't afford to do, I say look to Israel, a nation a fraction of our size that has staved off an attack from a nation 10 times its. And it has made a choice. It has made it work, and we may not have its daily reminders of the threats we face, but we have the same duty to our citizens. Well, interesting stuff. The recent attack on Israel has highlighted to the West the importance of air defence. Even a sophisticated system like Israel's wasn't enough to intercept the strike completely. Our friends and foes are ramping up their defence spending, whilst our government has whittled spending on our armed forces down to 2% of GDP. So, for the great British debate this hour, I'm asking, is it time for the UK to build something like an Iron Dome, at least? Well, I'm joined now by James Schneider, former Labour advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, Philip Blond, former advisor to David Cameron, and Tobias Ellwood, Conservative MP for Bournemouth East and former chairman of the Defence Select Committee. Well, I'm going to start with you, Tobias. Is Penny right? And I understand that we probably wouldn't use an exact same system as an Iron Dome, but the principle of what she's saying.
Yes, certainly. As you described, what happened in the Middle East will raise concerns as to whether we have such a similar capability in the UK. And as you alluded to, we have entered a new era of insecurity, and whoever wins the next general election will need to spend more on defence. The question is how and what? What do we actually need? What are the actual threats that are coming over the horizon? Bear in mind, we're part of NATO, so anything that's emerging, missiles or drones from the east, would fly over friendly forces as well. And of course, the war at the moment in Europe is in Ukraine, and we've done brilliantly in sending our equipment to there, because that's where the fight currently is. But the Army has capabilities, as does the Navy and indeed the RAF, to protect our skies right now. The Army has something called Sky Sabre, which is a short to medium range anti-aircraft, anti-missile system. The Navy has Sea Viper, which we've seen in use in the Red Sea, taking down those Houthi drones. Also shortly introduced something called Dragonfire, which quite incredible, state-of-the-art, high-density laser beams, which I think is a sign of the future. And then finally, it's worth mentioning the RAF has two bases, Coningsby and Lossiemouth, in North Scotland, on quick reaction alert, able to scramble typhoons in a matter of minutes to take down any defence air attacks that may come in. Types of attacks that actually participated, as you implied, when the Iranians sent their missiles and drones heading towards Israel.
Because as I understand it, the reason why it wouldn't be an Iron Dome system is because that is really for sort of closer range missile strikes, which Israel face on a daily basis. So it's the perfect system to protect them from kind of localised fire. But if it was, say, a ballistic missile or one of the other type missiles, it would need to be taken down well before it got anywhere into UK airspace. And I'm just wondering, what capabilities do we have the capabilities to do that, Tobias?
Yes, I just listed three capabilities: the Army, the Air Force, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy. What I think we are going to need in the future is how do we counter a rogue drone attack, for example, that's launched in the Dover Straits, for example. That's the sort of thing that we need to be prepared for. As you allude to, the reason why Israel is so good at this is because they've had to persistently protect themselves from those Hamas rockets over decades. And that's why they've perfected this system, which is very much localized as such. Where the world is going, absolutely, it will be part and parcel of any wider discussion as to how we make sure that we protect Britain's interests, both here and indeed overseas. Because we'll need to not only have these systems here in the UK, but also in our territories and indeed in our interests elsewhere.
OK, James Schneider.
I think that we should have defence systems that are the type that we need, not ones that are from very different contexts. As exactly as you're saying, the Iron Dome works in its particular context in Israel, where it is geographically and with the enemies that it has. It's not really relevant to Britain. So I think this so-called bold breaking ranks intervention by Penny Mordaunt is really not terribly much to do with how we defend ourselves in the future, and is much more about what future job she would like to have leading her party.
Well, but Tobias pointed out that you could have things being fired to us from a localised space rather than from a long range, and we haven't got anything to protect ourselves from anything like that. And even though you might not foresee that we would have any sort of argument with our partners and so on and so forth, I don't suppose Ukraine thought that Russia would attack after we all signed the Budapest memorandum, but they did.
I think there were lots of people in Ukraine that did think that Russia was a potential military threat, and they turned out to be correct. I think we should have defences that defend our country that are right for what we need. I mean, of course, that needs to have some speculation into the future, but it seems to me that things like cyber are much more likely to be a serious threat than, an armada of drones coming from France or something.
Did you see what happened to Israel? I mean, because that wasn't cyber, that was an armada of drones, just as you've...
Yes, but with it, as I said, Israel has a very different context where it is geographically and with its opponents than what we have.
Well,
so
but things
if I were in Israel,
all the time, but...
if we were sitting in an Israeli TV studio, I would say that the Iron Dome for Israel is an extremely good thing, and of course that they should invest in it. But we're not sitting in Tel Aviv. We're sitting here in London, and so we should have defence systems which are relevant to our context.
I think you should maybe prepare for the worst in all contexts. What do you think, Philip Bond?
Look, I think, Tobias, you sound far more optimistic than many other friends and colleagues I know in the armed services. Really, our defence systems are very platform dependent. You know, for the Olympics, we had a Type 45 destroyer parked in the Thames, and then we put defence missiles on top of buildings. In the scenario we're planning for, which is a conflict with Russia, most of our military platforms will be abroad defending British troops on the front line, one imagines, and on the NATO front line. We don't have in place, in situ, the adequate facilities to defend in the type of situation that we're trying to now plan for, which is mass missile attacks. We simply don't. And we have a range of figures commenting that what we need is an integrated platform with longer-range missile defence to precisely protect us against these attacks. We don't have enough aircraft against Russian glide bomb attacks where the bombers stand off and can launch numerous missiles. So I think that we're fine against kind of small interventions, but I don't think in the war we envisage, the platforms you're naming for defence will be abroad, not at home. And I think what Penny Mordaunt is right in arguing for is a land-based protection system appropriate to our circumstances, just like the Israelis have, but at a longer range.
And that was my point, really, why I asked you that, Tobias, with regards to whether we actually... I know you listed a load of platforms and things, but I was just sceptical as to whether we did actually have that capability to protect ourselves properly, even though we have these other things that are elsewhere. I just kind of would hope that we had something internally that we can control, that we can protect ourselves with, and I don't think we do. But anyway...
Well, I listed the technology that's there already, and there's absolutely right that what's been discussed here is the fact that the threats are changing. The world is getting more dangerous, not less, and we're seeing an alliance between these agitators, these aggressors, namely particularly Iran and indeed Russia. So absolutely, I stressed that at the very start. We will need to spend more on defence, and it will need to focus on air defence particularly. We have capabilities. We shouldn't dismiss the Type 45, the Sea Viper system. It is the best anti-aircraft, anti-missile, anti-drone system in the world. The world. I make that very, very clear. What we don't have is enough of them because the threat is clearly changing as we speak. We didn't expect to be having state-on-state aggression in the way that we are now about 10 to 15 years ago.
Listen,
that's what we now need to advance
time.
it. And that's why I've called for a defence review to be able to, for us to take stock of what threats are coming over the hill.
I've got to move on, but 10 seconds to you. I'll give you 10 seconds.
But the point is, Tobias, I agree with you about the Type 45, but in the war situation which we're now planning for, the Type 45s are not going to be parked up on Britain's shores to defend Britain's shores. They'll be in our shipping lanes.
Well, OK, thank you so much for that. We've run out of time. I could talk about this forever, but we will be carrying on with the Great British debate anyway. So thank you so much to James Schneider, former Labour advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, Philip Blond, former advisor to David Cameron, Tobias Ellwood, Conservative MP for Bournemouth East and former chairman of the Defence Select Committee.